Mark, President Trump saying the U.S. will eliminate Iranian fast attack ships if they come close to our blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. Why do you believe this is a game of chicken between the U.S. and Iran when it comes to the blockades of the Strait of Hormuz? And how is that one that the U.S. can't win?
Well, in essence, what you have is the U.S. saying, okay, we're going to block in order to get you back to the table, and we're going to block in order to kind of force you to reopen the strait. And you get into a question there where the Iranians have said clearly, we are not going to respond to that, except that we will start hitting, Gulf ally ports. The ports of the Gulf allies, and in response, if we need to. And the question then becomes, okay, so the U.S. has cut off, the Iranians are stopping the supply from the Gulf states. The Americans are stopping the supply of oil from Iran. What happens? Well, it not so much today, because the markets are listening to Trump saying that, the Iranians have already come to us and are asking for a deal. We'll see if that's true. I have my suspicions that it's not. But what happens then is that at some point the price of oil will go up because supply is shrinking. And then it's a question of who can last longer. The Iranians will be suffering, but they've had a windfall for the last month or so through their ability to sell oil, and sanctions, as John Bolton said, were lifted. They were eased so that they were able to sell. They didn't have to sell at a discount anymore. So they've been earning a big windfall, and they have a cushion now, so they can sit on that cushion for several weeks, or more, and even then, after that cushion expires, it's a question of are they willing to endure more economic pain, to inflict more economic pain on their own people than is the U.S. and other countries around the world that will be suffering inflation and potential recessions as a result of U.S. actions in the Gulf. And I just can't really see, knowing that who the Islamic Republic are, and how their leaders kind of have almost been looking for this kind of showdown with the U.S. for decades, that they will fold.
And you write in your column, Mark, make no mistake, the Iranian regime is monstrous and should not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. And you're not alone in folks that have come in and say, this has not been a friend at all of the United States in particular for many decades here. Having said that, we keep saying that for Iran, this is existential, and their willingness to fight kind of to the bitter end. Regime change is not easy. We keep hearing that over and over. And that is kind of different from where the U.S. is coming from. I mean, they could back off. The president reminds us we don't need the Strait of Hormuz. So I'm just, wondering, is that part of, too, why the U.S. can't really win using this tactic?
I think it's tough. I mean, I don't. There's a lot that I don't agree with John Bolton on. But one thing that he said, which is correct, is that this war only made sense to begin if it was going to end with regime change. Otherwise, you're simply trying to massage through force, the behavior of the Islamic Republic, and that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's hard enough through negotiation, but to do it by force, to kind of calibrate that and to get the right kind of reactions, it's almost impossible to do. So what you really want, to happen is regime change, so that you just have a different bunch of people in charge of whatever nuclear, stuff that they have, in charge of their ballistic missiles. This is a nation of 92 million. They are not going to completely disarm. What you want is to have a regime there that has an army, and it has an armed force, it has whatever, an air force, whatever it has, and it simply isn't going to threaten its neighbors in the way that Iran has. Regime change so far has failed.
Hey, one last question before we go, and this is on something else that I know you've written. You understand Europe so well. The Viktor Orban election outcome. We're hearing his daughter and son-in-law have left. Allies have disappeared from airwaves and social media pages. There's unconfirmed reports of the movement of assets abroad amid calls for the Orban-connected elite to be brought to justice. Just got about 30, 40 seconds here. What's the significance of this loss to the region, to Russian President Vladimir Putin, to even to President Trump?
It's really big. I mean, essentially, here was the model conservative, from sort of MAGA type conservative in Europe. He was in power for 16 years this time, 4 years on a previous term. And, he completely changed the fabric of Hungary, primarily because of a kind of quirk in the sort of institutional, makeup that allowed him to change the constitution at will and to change laws at will. That is now reversed. It's not just that he lost. The opposition won with a constitutional majority, so they are now able to undo a lot of that stuff. And you also, I think that's why you see, a lot of his allies, fleeing, because they know that the boot's now on the other foot.